Could sitting on the front row be the breakthrough that Rowdy needs to finally win the biggest race of the year? And the dual races set the field for the Daytona 500, and some drivers light race their way in. Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Daytona Speed Week's the week that kicks off the new season of NASCAR with the Daytona 500. But before that, you first must qualify. We had qualifying night on Wednesday night, and then we had last night's dual races that set the starting lineup for the Daytona 500. And there are a bunch of storylines coming out of qualifying and the dual races that set the field for the Great American Race. Let's get into all that happened on Wednesday night and last night. Number 1, setting the front row. Wednesday night was all about locking up the front row for the Daytona 500. The fastest two would have their starting spot secured for the Great American Race. And for the first time in his career, Kyle Busch, Rowdy, is on the pole for the Daytona 500 in his 21st attempt to win the Great American Race. A big boost for Kyle Busch and the number 8 team to be on the pole for this big race. Richard Childress Racing, they hadn't won a pole for the Great American Race since his grandson, Austin Dillon, did it back in 2014, the year they brought back the famed number 3 car. On Wednesday night, Kyle Busch was the fastest out of all the 45 cars that qualified and has secured his starting spot of first place for the Daytona 500. This is not his first Daytona pole. He had one back in 2013 with Joe Gibbs, but this is his first ever Daytona 500 pole. And even though history says in the past that winning the pole doesn't guarantee you the race win, because a pole starter hasn't won the Daytona 500 since Dale Jarrett back in 2000. But for Kyle Busch, it's got to feel pretty good because he gets a lot of media hype about winning the pole for the big race, and maybe it's the breakthrough that leads him to win the Daytona 500 because he's tried so many times to win this big race and just falling up short. Last year was his 20th attempt to win the big race, and by the way, we are excluding 2015 because he didn't run in that race due to the leg injury he suffered in the O'Reilly Auto Parts race the day before. But on Wednesday night, Busch was able to put in a fast lap with his number 8 Chevrolet thanks to the Richard Childress crew and his brand new crew chief, Jim Pullman. Another story that we haven't really talked about this year. Kyle Busch is working with a brand new crew chief in Jim Pullman, who has had experience in the O'Reilly Auto Parts series the last few years with Busch and Allgaier, and those two won the championship together in 2024. So the big question is, Pullman's experience with the O'Reilly Auto Parts series, can it translate to Cup and help out Kyle Busch and maybe get him back to being competitive and maybe winning some races, something he hasn't done in almost 3 years? Time will tell, but it's a good start nonetheless to see the 8 team on the pole for the big race. Starting outside pole will be last year's pole sitter, Chase Briscoe. Boy, those Toyotas have brought some really good speed on qualifying night the last couple of years and coming oh so close to being on the front row. Obviously, Briscoe broke through with the pole last year, and he backs it up again this year sitting on the front row. That 19 car sure knows how to get around Daytona here, even though it's been very, very fast in the draft. Sometimes has had its problems back then in qualifying with Martin Truex Jr. driving, but 2 years in a row that Briscoe's in the car and he's on the front row for the big race, that's very, very impressive. And we all know that Briscoe last year started on the pole and he finished 4th in the Daytona 500, so maybe second place starting spot, gets some good track position, and he ran very well, by the way, in his dual race on Thursday night, being able to lead a lot of laps before he bailed out after a slow pit stop and pretty much secured a starting spot for the front row. But Busch and Briscoe are on the front row for the Daytona 500 on Sunday. Number 2, locking in. Not only did we set the front row for the Daytona 500 Wednesday night, but we also would determine which of the open teams would secure starting spots into the big race through qualifying speeds. And they were Corey Heim for 2311 Racing and Justin Allgaier for Junior Motorsports. Corey Heim coming into this race with a big opportunity to drive for Michael Jordan, Denny Hamlin's team in a 4th entry out of the 2311 stable. A pretty big moment for him, and of course, wanting to be in the biggest race of the year, he knew that he had to qualify for the big race. As a matter of fact, he was the first car out of all 45 to go out and make a qualifying run. And he was able to put in a very solid lap that actually secured him a spot inside the top 10 for the final round of qualifying. And that all but guaranteed Heim's spot in the Great American Race to run this big event. And the other driver that was able to lock his way in, as mentioned, Justin Allgaier for Junior Motorsports. The second year that this team has attempted the Great American Race. Last year they got in by racing their way in. This year, they get it done with time trial speeds. And it was interesting because he was also the second car to go out of all the 45 cars on Wednesday night session. So it was a little bit of a pressure situation for both of those two guys. The first two guys to go out are the two guys that locked themselves into the Daytona 500, their qualifying speeds. Now, even though Corey LaJoie finished his lap right after Justin Allgaier, they were still in the top 10, and they had to wait for a few cars to go because if for some reason both of those guys were able to make it into the final round of qualifying, then it was not a guarantee that Allgaier was locked in and LaJoie could have run faster. But eventually faster cars went, they bumped them both out, and that meant because Allgaier was ahead, he would lock himself into the Great American Race. So big moment for him, Dale Earnhardt Jr., Kelly Earnhardt Miller, and the stable Junior Motorsports stable to get that number 40 car into the Daytona 500 again. And those two did not have to worry about anything in the dual races last night because there was a new rule set in place that if you lock yourself in on qualifying speed Wednesday night, you're not eligible to run for a transfer spot on Thursday night and have anybody else behind you move up a spot. So that pretty much took the pressure off of those guys, and now their focus is set forward for the Great American Race. Number 3, Logano wins his 4th duel. Last night, the duel races set the starting lineup for the Daytona 500, and Joey Logano captured the checkered flag in the first duel, beating out Ryan Blaney, Austin Dillon, Brad Keselowski, and John Hunter Nemechek for the victory. It was a battle, though, for Joey Logano to get up there and try to take the lead away because he was in a battle, pushing with his teammate Ryan Blaney, helping his teammate Ryan Blaney, battling out those Roush Fenway Keselowski racing cars, all 4 of them in that first duel, mind you. They had to work their tails off to get up to the front of the field and mix and mingle with those guys. Then we had pit stops, but that all changed when we had a caution when the first group came to pit road, which was mainly Ford group. We had a spin at the back and pretty much changed the outcome of the race. It did move all those Fords that pitted together up to the front of the field, but then we had a caution with 4 laps to go when Austin Dillon got in the back of Bubba Wallace, sending him around in the pack and collected William Byron and Chris Buescher and Chandler Smith. And that pretty much set it up an overtime restart where Logano and Blaney had to battle out against Brad Keselowski and Corey LaJoie to see which of those Ford teams was going to be able to be across the start-finish line first. But thankfully, Logano got a big push from Blaney down the back straightaway on the last lap, and as they started wrecking right behind him and brought the yellow out, and Logano was able to cruise home to his 4th career dual victory. He won one back in 2019, 2020, and in 2023. So, Joey Logano, does he have speed? You better believe it. Does he have a good chance to win the Daytona 500? You better believe it. The guy knows how to get around Daytona no matter which generation of car he's been. The Gen 6 car, he was really good. Of course, won the 2015 500. These next-gen cars, he's always been up front leading laps in these races. True, he hasn't been able to win the 500 with this next-gen car, but the speed's been there. And if luck falls in his favor on Sunday, you could see sliced bread raise the Harley JL Trophy for the second time. But a great performance last night by Joey Logano and the 22 team to get the dual win. They start 3rd on Sunday. Number 4, Duel 2 winner, the most popular driver. Chase Elliott brought home the checkered flag in dual race number 2 last night to set the outside lane for the Daytona 500. He beat out Carson Hocevar, Kyle Larson, Michael McDowell, and Christopher Bell to get the job done. Most of that race, Chase Elliott was pretty much trying to fight his way to the front, but it was just behind those Joe Gibbs racing cars of Chase Briscoe and Denny Hamlin, even though he had help from behind from some other Toyota drivers, like there was Christopher Bell or Eric Jones, or no matter how hard he and Kyle Larson tried to work together, it just didn't really seem like that the 9 could get that outside lane going. But then when we had our cycle of green flag pit stops with about 15 laps to go, Elliott was able to get in a pack between Jones and Hamlin, and then when they started passing all those other guys that pitted after them, they got massive runs down the back stretch and were able to maneuver their way through some guys, and there were some close calls with some guys trying to cut off those faster cars, slowing the momentum down that were just coming off of pit road. Thankfully, we didn't have any wrecks at all, but it was some tense moments those last couple laps. But then Elliott was able to find his way to the front with about 7 laps to go and pretty much controlled the rest of the race, even though he had the 77 of Hocevar up against his back bumper. And I was worried because Hocevar, he wants to win a cup race, even if it's an exhibition race. He, I thought, was going to make some sort of run on the 9 car, no matter how hard he was up against the back bumper of that 9 before they got into those corners and pushing him on the back straightaway. But Elliott did a great job of dragging the brake and not letting the 77 or anybody behind him get a massive run and was able to hold his ground. And for the most part, I think the bow ties were working together in that last couple laps in that duel race to try to see what they can do and showcase that, hey, we can work together on Sunday to best these Fords, because the Toyotas, even though there are some big teams that have Toyota help, they're limited in numbers. And Elliott was able to make it work with the Spire cars and his teammate Kyle Larson last night to get his third career duel win. He won one back in 2017, the year he was on the pole, and 2018, where he was able to start in fourth spot. Could this maybe be the year that we see the most popular driver hoist the Harley Gerald Trophy, something that his dad Bill did twice? We shall see, but it's a good start to Chase Elliott's chance to try to win the 500. And number 5, racing your way in versus going home. Last night Duels races not only set the starting lineup for the 500, but it also dictated which drivers would make the show versus who would load up and go home. In the first duel, it was a bunch of dark horse Mustangs battling out for one transfer spot. Corey LaJoie for Roush Fenway Keselowski Racing, Chandler Smith for Front Row Motorsports, and Casey Mears driving for Garage 66 owned by Carl Long, attempting to make the Daytona 500. And for the majority of that race, it was Corey LaJoie for the transfer spot, but then Chandler Smith was able to find his way up there and battle it out with him at times. When we had that caution coming onto pit road, which was actually Casey Mears at the back of the pack because he locked it up, lost control, and spun into Noah Gragson, and both of them got stuck in the grass, that NASCAR had no choice but to wave the yellow flag. And that put Casey Mears a lap down because he was stuck there for a little bit until he eventually got out. But after that group that came to pit road featured the likes of Corey LaJoie and Chandler Smith, they were able to cycle further up to the front of the grid, and they were mixing it out, battling it out for that final transfer spot to get in. Then when the wreck happened with 4 to go and it collected Chandler Smith and pretty much damaged the splitter, it took him out, and it looked like it was going to be Corey LaJoie's moment to make the Daytona 500 again. But that all changed on the backstretch on the last lap, as they were all fighting their way down the backstretch, battling for the best position possible. A lot of bump drafting was happening at the front of the pack, and it looks like Daniel Suarez kind of hit the back of LaJoie's car hard, and it sent him out of control and into the pack, and unfortunately knocked him out of the Daytona 500. And who should make the Daytona 500 out of all that with a Hail Mary move by everybody? That's right, Casey Mears, because the last caution with 4 to go, he got his lap back to the wreck on the backstretch that collected Chandler Smith and Byron and Busher and Dylan and Bubba Wallace. Mears got his lap back, and he pulled a Hail Mary move through turn 3 to dodge the wreck, even though he actually hit the back of the 7 of Suarez so hard it bashed the front nose in. He still was able to race his way in with a battered front nose in 8th place to make the Daytona 500, his first 500 since 2019, when he's able to lock himself in on qualifying speed that year. This year, he has raced his way in, and for the former winner of the Coca-Cola 600, he gets another shot at a Daytona 500, and more than likely is his last attempt at the Great American Race. But Casey Mears is in the big show for Garage 66, but Corey LaJoie and Chandler Smith with battered race cars, unfortunately, their day is over, and they will not be in the Daytona 500. Then we go to duel number 2, where it was all a bunch of bow ties to make the Daytona 500. Anthony Alfredo for Beard Motorsports, BJ McLeod for his own team Live Fast Motorsports, and JJ Yeley for the New York Racing Team. By the way, all 3 of these guys did not make the 500 last year. So this was pretty much a redemption arc for all these guys to try to get in. And most of the race, it was dominated by Anthony Alfredo, who just found himself in the right lanes. And at times, BJ McLeod could work the 3rd lane behind Eric Jones and a few others, but then he would get shuffled back, and then came those pit stops where Alfredo was able to come in with the group, actually leading that pack, and he was able to stay with the lead group after the pit stop sequence cycled through. McLeod and Yeley, however, lost the draft, and I think Yeley had some problems at the very end, and ultimately he was knocked out of the 500. So Alfredo decided, I'm just going to back off, not mind my P's and Q's, and I'm going to be in the Daytona 500. And as the front of the pack battled it out towards the very end of that race, they came across the start-finish line, and then Alfredo, all by himself, crosses the start-finish line in the number 62, ahead of McLeod, and into the Daytona 500. And you could just see the emotion in Anthony Alfredo after the race had concluded, after not making it last year. You could just see how much it means to these guys to make the Daytona 500. Racing your way in, it's stressful, but just to be in it when it's all said and done, a pretty incredible moment for the 62 team. Or so we thought. Post-race inspection happened, and it turns out Anthony Alfredo was disqualified from that dual race and ultimately knocked out of the Daytona 500, which led NASCAR to inspect the 78 car, and when he passed tech, BJ McLeod is now in the Daytona 500. Anthony Alfredo and JJ Yeley go home. What the issue was with Anthony Alfredo's car is pretty much this. And the main issue with Anthony Alfredo that he wasn't able to make the race was the transaxle cooling hose came loose. And due to that coming loose and not being able to pass NASCAR inspection, NASCAR disqualified the 62 team, and therefore they will not make the Daytona 500 for the second year in a row. That's heartbreaking because you saw the emotion in Alfredo. You just saw how much it meant to him to make the race. To come find out hours later, we're not actually going to race because our transaxle cooling hose came loose. So a very tough moment for Anthony Alfredo and the 62 team. But for BJ McLeod, he's in the 500, and now he has all of today and all of tomorrow to look for sponsorship to put on his car for Sunday because it's a blank black car. If they could find a sponsor to put on that car for Sunday, it'd be a big moment for him and that team. So a big congratulations to Casey Mears and BJ McLeod on racing their way in the Daytona 500. Unfortunately, Corey LaJoie, Chandler Smith, Anthony Alfredo, and JJ Yeley do not get to race. So, the starting lineup for the Daytona 500 is now officially set. With Kyle Busch and Chase Briscoe leading the field to green, we had our dual winners from last night, and we had our guys that raced their way into the Daytona 500. Tonight, we've got the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series season opener at Daytona with the Fresh from Florida 250. And then tomorrow, late afternoon, the NASCAR O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, the debut of the new titleman sponsor, kicks off with the United Rentals 300 as we watch some of our veterans and up-and-coming stars battle it out the high banks of Daytona for 300 miles. And of course, Sunday is the big race, the Daytona 500. I'll have a recap of the truck race and the O'Reilly Auto Parts race for tomorrow's events tomorrow leading up to the Daytona 500. So I hope everybody enjoys tonight's race and tomorrow afternoon's race, and I hope you all enjoyed the qualifying session and the duels the last two nights. So subscribe, like, a big congrats to Kyle Busch and Chase Briscoe sitting on the front row, double congrats to Joey Logano and Chase Elliott and their dual wins, and triple congrats to Casey Mears and BJ McLeod on racing their way into the Daytona 500. Have a great day, everybody. Let's go racing!